If there was one sector that was impacted by COVID outside of healthcare, it was travel. Now, many people who are on green cards, they traveled out of US at that time. It was out of their control, and they incurred extra time outside the country in a second country, right? Now, many of these people became naturalized citizens recently. For the fiscal year 2021, USCIS naturalized over 809,000 citizens, naturalized citizens. This was part of ceremonies that happened all across the world. Now, many of these naturalized citizens were impacted by COVID related travel. Now, did that impact their naturalization? What is the requirement to become a naturalized citizen? We're going to discuss all of that today. Hello and welcome to Thursdays Live with Chug. My name is Neha Mahajan. I'm the Business Development and Outreach Manager here at Chug LLP Attorneys and CPAs. And joining me all the way from Indiana is a partner and attorney, Ritu.Chokshi. Hi there, Ritu. Welcome.
Nice to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yes, absolutely. Now, Ritu, during COVID, was your phone ringing off the hook? People calling you and asking you, Ritu, I am stuck in India or I'm stuck, in South America and I'm a legal permanent resident. I'm going to be naturalized in 2 years. I don't know how this is going to impact my naturalization. COVID struck us all unexpectedly, really. And many people were traveling at that point. Now, does this or has this impacted their naturalization?
So it definitely has. I think one of the most common questions I was asked was, how do I make sure that I can come back to the US? So it isn't directly the naturalization piece that they were worried about, but it was also just coming back. Because say you went to India and then your green card expired, or you were supposed to come back in 6 months or 3 months, but now you're stuck and you don't want to come back because maybe your health is not so good, you don't want to travel, or you have restrictions in terms of even entry within the US and vaccinations were not available. There was so much going on. So there was a lot going on. Primarily, people were worried about how to enter with their green card because they were worried it wouldn't work if they'd stayed out for more than 6 months to a year.
Right. All right. So, USA gives away over 1 million green cards each year. So if you got your green card recently and want to know the do's and the don'ts to become a naturalized citizen, because there are a lot of ifs and buts, please continue watching. Ritu, how long after getting the green card can one really apply to be a naturalized citizen of United States of America?
So there's always many different pathways to it, right? If you were someone who got your green card through your spouse and who was a citizen, it's sometimes as quick as 3 years. If you were someone who got it through some other family member or through your work visa or something like that, it's usually 5 years. But again, it depends. So the very first thing I always tell clients is, take a look at your green card. It actually will tell you how long is it valid until. Is it a 2-year green card? Because that's a conditional green card. What that means is you can't directly even renew it, and you can't apply for naturalization till the conditions are removed. Is it a regular green card, which is usually 10 years? It's valid for 10 years. And for that one, you have the choice to apply for naturalization at one of those marks, depending on who you fall into as a category.
Right. Okay. All right. Now, from green card to becoming a naturalized US citizen, the path seems quite easy. Or is it? Right? It is tricky and certain situations can get out of control, right? Now, what are some of the things one must do to kind of maintain the residency in the United States of America?
So these are the things that usually when something's gone wrong, I hear about it. And so if I could sit everybody down who got their green card, I'm like, first, hey, congratulations. I know this was a long time coming and we're so excited you have it. But now that you have it, here are a few things you want to make sure. One, if you move anywhere within the US or even outside, well, you shouldn't be moving outside, but if you do move addresses, you want to let USCIS know, because this isn't a permanent thing. You have to continue to keep in touch with the immigration side of things to maintain your green card. The other thing I tell people is make sure you're paying your taxes, because now with the green card, one of the things they're going to look at is, have you paid your taxes? Have you kept in touch with the agencies that you've now are responsible towards? stay out of trouble. You can get in trouble if you are, a resident here. You also want to make sure that if you are someone who's between the age of 18 and 25 and you're a male, you're registering for selective service. This is one of the most commonly asked questions that comes up when they're trying to naturalize. They're like, oh, I was in the US when I was between 18 and 25, but I never knew I had to register for selective service. So it's an interesting thing where you discover these parts of your responsibilities. But if you could, those are a few things I would say, go and make sure you're doing.
All right. Have you ever had cases where, people come up to you and say, hey, Ritu, I didn't want to be in a DUI, but I ended up being in one.
Yes.
It was just one of those unfortunate situations. And
Mhm.
now I'm scared what might come by when I am going to become a naturalized citizen.
Yeah.
Have you ever had a case like that?
So DUI is fairly common, and I think that's where you most often will hear from a client and say, hey, I got into trouble. What do I do? I'm a resident. Do I need to worry? And that's such a case by case thing because every state has their own laws and how the laws interact with immigration. They're very dependent. But the idea is, as soon as you get into trouble, even if it's a traffic violation, so say, you got into an accident and you have this huge fine that you have to pay, or you left the scene, or I had a client, this was a funny incident for me to hear about, but it was horrible for him because he was a resident. And all that had happened was his friend bought a gun and showed it to him. The gun was in the trunk of his car and he wanted to show it and he did. But my client was a resident and you are not supposed to be around firearms. And so a neighbor called it in and he was actually put in removal proceedings just for being around that kind of a weapon. And so what I tell clients is as soon as you get in trouble of any kind, if you're a resident, you want to talk to an attorney, a state attorney, and someone who will make sure that whatever your conviction is something that is safe for you to have with your residency. Because it's when the charges convert to a conviction that the trouble begins for us to be able to fix or retain your residency.
All right. So in that case, the attorney needs to know the state laws as well as immigration laws.
Absolutely. And you would want to work with good criminal defense counsel, not just a public defender, because sometimes they don't know about the implication of this crime to your immigration status. They'll know everything related to criminal, charges and how to protect those pieces, but not your immigration status. So you want to combine those two counsel where possible to make sure you get the best deal.
All right. For those of you who are joining us right now and wondering what is it that we're talking about today on the live, we're talking about maintaining your residency and timing your naturalization. Just want to reiterate, we're live on Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn, and we are live. So if you have any questions, type it out in the comment section, or if you're watching a recorded version, send those questions to us, info@chug.com. That's info@chug.com. The information is right there on your screen as well. Disclaimer, the discussion today is for informational purposes only, does not create an attorney-client relationship. Now, Ritu, what are some of the things that are absolutely prohibited for someone who's a resident of the USA? I know you mentioned staying out of trouble, but I'm sure there's more to it.
Yeah, so there are a few things that if they happen within the span of you being a resident, there's a lot of trouble that we can't sometimes even fix. One that comes to mind, and I think you might have read it in newspaper stories or things like that, but someone who claimed to be a citizen on even a work document by mistake, say, because maybe you were young or you were not thinking or you just picked that box that said that you were a citizen, that is called something as false claim of citizenship. Basically, you can't do that. And that bars you from naturalizing, but it can also put you in removal proceedings and it can become a whole big brouhaha. So you want to be careful that you don't claim to be a citizen and be respectful of the idea.
Right. That's very sad because, when you go into college, you're given all these,
documents you're filling out.
Documents to fill, and someone who is a legal permanent resident or on a visa here can accidentally check the box that says it could be unintentional, but then how do you prove it in the court of law that this was unintentional and it was an innocent mistake? Because I think there's a gray area here and law doesn't really care whether this was innocent mistake or not.
Exactly. And then it becomes one of those things where do they apply their discretion? Do they understand if it was a mistake? Were you really, did you assume you were a citizen, or what was going on? And you will have to unpack that. But the idea is, if you know, and as we're talking right now, make sure that you're being careful with any documents you fill out, mortgage applications. Here's another one that I think everyone should pay attention to. When you go to renew your driver's license, the BMV, the state BMV, is where a lot of this mess happens. They might register you to vote. They might end up registering you for jury duty. And all of those things just happen because they clicked one box without asking whether you were a resident or a citizen, because they're not familiar. Not every agency knows how to differentiate between these statuses. And here you have it. In a few months after you got your driver's license renewed, you're going to get a voter registration thing where it says you can go vote now. And by mistake, if you vote, that's another big no. You're not supposed to vote. You don't have the right to vote or appear in jury duty in any state in the United States as a resident. So you want to be careful with that too.
All right. So jury duty, and do not ever click on a document that says or can imply even that you are a U.S. citizen, right?
Right. One of the things I tell clients is, if something like that happens where if something happened and you've ended up in this position where you've claimed to be a citizen, or you've received this voter registration card or a jury duty invitation, don't ignore it. You have to start to address it. Talk to someone, make sure you're calling the phone line and notifying them that, hey, this is a mistake. I'm not a citizen. And you have to put it in writing. You have to write them a letter and say, hey, I'm not a citizen. I am not qualified to appear for this. And so you've taken the steps to show that you understand your rights and that you cannot do this.
Well, that just reminded me, I've done that when I was on my visa. You know, I have done that in past. I would always get this jury duty and I'll be like, why are they sending it to me? I'm a visa holder, right? And I would make sure that I would call up the number that's listed up there and tell them that, hey, I am not a US citizen. If you can, please take me off the list.
Yep. And that's exactly what you want to do. You don't want to ignore it. You want to deal with it. You want to put it in writing if you can. And make sure you've done your due diligence and remember it. So when you're trying to naturalize, if it comes up, you can say, this is what happened. This is what I did. I obviously know that I'm a resident, so I did not claim to be a citizen or exercise any of the rights of citizenship.
All right. Seems like getting naturalized is a Pandora's box.
It is.
You want to keep your...
You know, one of the other big ones, and this comes from what you were talking about, this whole travel thing, right? One other thing that can happen is you can involuntarily abandon your residency. So when you stay outside of the US for over a year at the border, they're going to assume that you did not intend to stay a resident and you've now maybe entered something called abandonment of your residency. And that's with COVID and how we started the discussion. I think that's another important thing to remember, that as a resident, you're required to live in the US. If you take trips outside frequently, that is absolutely okay. Just make sure that you don't start to use your residency card like a visa. You know, you're supposed to be here, so kind of maintain that kind of travel records.
Yeah, I just feel like people have waited so long to get their green cards. They really want to use it as a travel card. Green card. I mean, that's the reality I'm getting.
Yeah, no, I understand how tough it is to kind of stay put in a country where you can go in and out easily and to finally have that freedom. So use it all you can. Just make sure you kind of keep your travel limited to under 6 months if possible. If it's going to be longer, if you know that there's stuff going on where you want to be away for a little longer, or work is putting you there, or you want to go take advantage of something where you're studying abroad for a little while, whatever that case might be, at that point, you want to start talking to an attorney again to see if you need a re-entry permit or you need to plan around how that's going to look when you come back.
All right. I was actually going to ask you to go into details about travel, but I think you've already covered that part. So if you could just summarize in pointers for our audience right now, you know, how does travel impact their naturalization or their residency, if I may?
Yeah. So with the naturalization piece, there's two main things that an officer is going to look at, right? They're going to look at whether you've continuously been a resident for 5 years or 3 years prior to you applying, and what was the physical presence in that 5 years that you now are claiming to want to be a citizen after. So continuous presence, that particular phrase basically means that you haven't left or you haven't gone out of the country for more than 6 months, and that all through, even if you then end up being outside of the country for more than 6 months, you have maintain ties. So you have a house here, you're paying rent, you're doing things. You aren't kind of out of here,
Yeah.
for more than 6 months. And the physical presence, this is the easier part, where it's like how many days in the last 5 years have you lived here, and physically been present. And that can be done just by looking at your travel dates and deducting it and seeing if you and this is a surprising part where people assume you have to live 5 years in the US before you can apply for citizenship. No, you just have to be a resident for 5 years. The living part, you can be in and out of the country as much as you want, as long as you spent about 30 months within the 5 years within the
All
US.
right. I was going to ask you about the magic number. So 30 months is the
Yeah,
magic number. Be in
30
in
months.
the States, 30 months.
Yeah, that's not very hard, right? It's about
Yeah.
900 days or so, give or
Yeah.
take, within 5 years. And so if you've met that, even if you were out for so many trips and what have you, you can still apply.
All right. A little while ago in our discussion, we discussed about situations outside of our control, like COVID happened, right? And
Yes.
you mentioned about discretion, right? And
Mhm.
involuntary abandonment of the green card, the residency. Now, what are some of the things that can be done if you're unexpectedly in a situation like this? Right?
Yeah.
You're in a situation that's beyond your control, you're out of the country, and you have stayed there way longer than your planned time. What can a person do?
So this is a great question. I think this is probably what I've been most commonly asked in the last year or two. Say you had an elderly parent and they did not want to travel to the US because of their health risks, and they've now, as a resident, they've now stayed outside of the US for a year. You have to understand that at this point, the Border Patrol has the right to inspect and understand why is it that you stayed outside for more than a year. It isn't automatic. It isn't like as soon as you're outside for a year, your green card is gone. No, you have to now start to build the explanation. You have to explain first. First, show ties, right? So continuous presence can be maintained by ties. And that, what I mean by that is, make sure you paid your taxes. If you are elderly parent, make sure that you are claimed as a dependent on your children's taxes. If you maintained a cell phone, keep that cell phone. Don't stop paying that. So you show a monthly charge for that. If you have rent or mortgage that's going out the door, wonderful. If you're working remotely, keep your pay stubs to show that you still
Right.
maintain employment in the US. You were not there physically, but you're still
Right.
someone who's engaged with things there.
Right.
Health
Utilities.
insurance.
Yeah. Utilities, right? Yeah.
Exactly. Utility bills, health insurance. If they have nothing, and elderly parents sometimes have a hard time documenting things here, I say,
Right.
please get a cell phone bill, please get a bank account, do some transactions, let them shop, whatever.
Right.
Just make sure that you're keeping your bank accounts, you're keeping some local
Got it.
presence alive
Okay.
throughout that time. So you're going to show that. You're going to show the continued presence. You're going to show your attempts to come back. So if you booked flight tickets, show them that I was trying to come here, then this law changed, or this factor happened, or I fell sick, and that's why I didn't come back. And so you want to show presence, you want to show your ties, you want to make sure that you're explaining why you weren't able to do that. But there's one more thing. So the biggest thing I tell people is, nobody can take your green card except for an immigration judge, right? So, but here's the funny thing that happens at the border. The Border Patrol agent will say, well, you've been out for a year. I don't think you maintained your responsibility. Here's a form. Sign this. It says you're giving away your green card because you failed to stay in the US. And this is basically a voluntary giving back of your green card, that they're making you sign that form. And you shouldn't do that, because you have rights. You should argue your case and say, this was not something you meant to do. Don't sign that document, because then it's a lot more work for me to take that document away and say, no, you did not mean to abandon your green card. So
This
be
is
careful.
great piece of advice, Ritu. But think of people,
Yeah.
seeing a CBP officer itself is
Yeah.
quite intimidating. And
It
when an
is.
officer says that you need to sign a particular document, it's very
Yeah.
hard to put bring yourself together to not sign and
is.
kind of fight him or her at that point in time.
Absolutely. And that's what I say. Just be polite. First, calm down, know your rights, and you know them. I'm just telling you right now, only an immigration judge can take your green card. Nobody else can. So a CBP officer cannot take away your right to use your green card at a port of entry. They can make an argument. They can say, okay, I'm going to send you to court, and you will. You will end up getting a notice saying you want to now start to talk about your case with the judge, and that's fine.
Okay.
You want to be calm, and you want to just kind of hold yourself together and say, no, officer, I please request you to give me a form that allows me to discuss my case with my attorney or a judge or someone else. But I do not want to abandon my green card because I am a resident and I want to continue being a resident. That's all you need to say.
All right, that's gold mine right now, Ritu. Thank you for sharing that.
Of course.
All right, we have an audience question, Ritu, and just want to take a moment to reiterate we're live on Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn. So if you have any questions for us, type them down in the comment section, and we'll be happy to answer them. If you're watching a recorded version, info@chuk.com. The information is right there on your screen as well. So I've been outside the country for over a year. What can I expect to happen at the time of re-entry? We pretty much answered that question, but if you could just, in brief, kind of like just summarize in pointers, that would be amazing.
Yeah. So whenever you're trying to re-enter, right, and you have either an expired green card, because that happens too, or you have been outside longer than you'd expected, there are about 3 different kinds of people you'll interact with or systems that you interact with that I want you to be aware of. The first one's obviously your airline and their agents. If you're doing immigration through them, and the port of entry is tied to where it's a middle of your journey, they can also stop you from boarding the plane, right? So you want to first interact with them, make sure that whoever is booking your flight or the contact center, you've connected with them and said, hey, I have this expired green card, but regulations allow me to use it, and here's the explanation. Do you foresee any issues with me being able to board the plane? So deal with it up front, especially if you have those kind of things going on. The second one, obviously, we talked about this Customs and Border Patrol agent. And so their job is to figure out whether you intended to use your residency as a visa or you are actually a resident who kind of got stuck outside. So as long as you understand why they're asking you what they're asking you, I think you'll be better prepared to answer the questions. And then the last resource is, as a resident, you have access to the U.S. embassies. So if your 1 year became 3 years, became 4 years, whatever happened, the embassies in the country of birth or wherever you are right now will have access to something called a returning resident visa or the ability to give you some other documents, travel documents that you can use to be able to come back. And so you should contact the liaison there as well.
All right. Thank you, Ritu. That's really, really helpful information. There's another question. I have a 3-year green card. When can I apply for citizenship? And I think you may also add, if those who have, 5-year green cards, you could add that to your answer as well, Ritu.
Sure. So I tell everyone, as long as you know that, plan about 6 months prior to the expiry of your green card in the context of a 3-year or a 5-year. 90 days before that day is when you can apply. So say you got your residency in 2019, then somewhere in 2022, you should be ready to file if you've maintained the physical presence required, which is about, 30 months for a 5-year green card.
Okay. All right. Thank you. We are reaching the last leg of our discussion today. I know you're very thankful for that, Ritu. This is the first time we're talking like this.
I hope this was useful. Yeah.
Oh, it is. Oh my God. Yeah. You're going to be coming back on this discussion very, very soon. I can certainly foresee that. So here is another audience question.
Sure.
What do I need to apply for naturalization? What is the process like? And I think we've discussed this in bits and pieces throughout our discussion today, but just if you could summarize again. Yeah. So
the very first thing is, have you followed all the rules that we talked about? So have you filed your taxes? Do you owe any overdue taxes? Child support payments, if you're doing those, make sure that those are clean. And so if you've been a great resident where you've met the timing requirement, which means you've had the 5 years less 90 days and you've not had any trouble, then you're ready to apply. And the application process is actually quite simple. There's not much going on. You fill out the form. The evidence that you need to attach is also very, very simple. You're just putting your green card in there and showing them your status. And then you have to appear for a test. The naturalization test is fun. It's lots of civics questions. You can study with your school-going kids for it. You appear for the test, and then there's an oath ceremony, and then you're a citizen.
All right. You made it sound so easy.
I think I do recommend that after going through all the visa troubles and so much documentation, this is the part where you celebrate, right? So this, when you are ready to naturalize, I want you to feel like, yay, this is happening. But also, it is very simple. People are excited that you're choosing America as your home.
Right.
Officers are very kind at that end of the spectrum. They've done their due diligence while they gave you the residency. After that, it's sort of like a party. So I hope more people take up the opportunity to naturalize.
All right. One last question.
Yeah.
Can I help my elderly parents naturalize without meeting the testing requirements?
Yeah, this is another one. I have a lot of neighbors and elderly parents who refuse to naturalize because they're like, I don't want to deal with the formal setting of the test, or I don't want to speak in English that much. My English is not as good. And so here's a couple of tips or a couple of numbers to remember. The very first one is 50-20. So what that means is if you've been a resident for 20 years and you're over the age of 50, then you can maybe take an interpreter with you to the test center. So you have to appear for the test, but then the test will happen in a language that's more comfortable to you. It won't be in English. Similarly, if you're 55 years of age and over and have been a resident for 15 years, the same thing applies. You get the English language exemption is what it's called. Now, if you're over 65 and you've been a resident for about 20 years or more, then at that point, they will even make the civics questions simple for you. So instead of asking you from 100 questions, you'll only have to study maybe 15, 20 of them. And obviously the language exemptions exist as well. So they make it comfortable for you to be able to approach that.
Okay.
Another thing I tell clients is if you have an elderly parent who is a resident, has been a resident for a long time, but they're hesitant because maybe they have dementia or they have speech issues. So they have to accommodate those. You can even take a doctor's help to write a letter and to request for an exception to the testing requirement. That's a bit more complicated, but there are options, and I do think you should explore them just so they have all the rights of being here and access to all the systems here if they've been here this long as a resident.
All right. Thank you, Ritu. And one absolute last question. This question is actually coming from me. And I probably should have asked you right at the onset of our discussion today. But why naturalize?
So this is a very personal choice, isn't it? Because we all come as immigrants. We've chosen America. We've lived here so many years. At some point in our lives, maybe very quickly or even as we waited, America feels like home. So if it is home and you're ready, then why not? And then the other part of this is there are some benefits, right? So you can apply for certain federal jobs. You don't have to worry about being stuck outside the country. You can travel with a US passport. You can also hold office. You can have a lot more, obviously, the right to vote. But also you can invite your family members to be part of the American society by applying for residency for them and have more access to those options as well. So if you're ready to make that commitment and it feels right, then I would say don't worry about the technical stuff. We'll take care of that. But definitely look into it.
Well explained. Well, that brings us to the end of today's discussion. Our attorney, Ritu.Chokshi, joined us from Indiana. Yes, we've opened another office in Indiana, brand new one.
Yes.
If you have any questions for us or suggestions on the kind of topics that you would like for us to discuss, please send them to us, info@chuk.com. Until then, stay safe and sound. This is Neha Mahajan saying bye. See you next week.